بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back everyone to our reading of this great text of our Tariq the Tasawwuf, Principles of Sufism by Sidi Ahmad Zarruq. In today's class we'll enter into a new chapter, a section. It's called Section 6, Knowledge and its Benefits. So we'll begin with Principle 76. Of course the principles just go, the numbering goes straight through from one to over and over. One after the other, sorry. But there are sections. So this section, so the next few principles or next set of principles will be about knowledge and its benefit. So principle 76, this is on page 58 if you have the PDF and you're following along. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. Knowledge is useful either as an incentive to seek more and as an encouragement thereto, or else it teaches us the right mode of action and its underlying reason, or it acquaints us with a matter that is beyond all of the foregoing, something that is informative to which it will lead us. So he has like three different kind of ideas of what knowledge can do, and then he's going to talk to you about what the difference between those three are. So just we'll wait till we get to that section. Amongst the sciences of the Sufis, the first category is to be found in the knowledge of exhortation, al-wa'adh, and of admonition, at-tadhkir. So the Sufis call the first type of knowledge, which it incentivizes you, or it encourages you, or something like that. We call that al-wa'adh. That somebody would. That's what basically the Friday sermon is about. That somebody would stand and admonish you, or remind you, or encourage you, something like that. An example of the second is the knowledge of the practical aspects of religion and servanthood. So, a little bit more detail, but still on the exterior kind of, this is how you pray, this is how you fast, this is how you pay your zakat, this is how you conduct the nikah, etc. An example of the third is the knowledge of revelation. The first revolves around the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, call thou to the way of the Lord with wisdom and fair exhortation, and reason with them in the better way. So, based on the verse, ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. So that verse obviously talks about exactly what he just said, which is to call people and warn people and remind people, etc. One group follows the former instruction while another follows the latter, each in accordance with its receptivity. So whether it's al-wa'd or a tadhkir. So sometimes you need to warn and sometimes you need to encourage, it depends. The second revolves around the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and whatsoever the messenger gives you, take it, and whatever he forbids, abstain from it. وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. So it's about halal and haram. So this is how you pray, this is how you make wudu. No, you can't do this when you walk into the mosque because of such and such. No, you can't pray Eid prayer at this time because. So it's about the rules, the do's and the don'ts. As for the third, it refers to the words of Allah Ta'ala, and fear God, God teaches you. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. And also it's based on the hadith, whoever acts according to what he knows, Allah Ta'ala will bequeath to him the knowledge of what he does not know before. So this third part, the more like detailed understanding of knowledge, notice in the verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Have taqwa of Allah and Allah then will teach you, not the other way around. In other words, knowledge doesn't lead to taqwa in the sequence of the verse, but rather it's one's taqwa, one's awareness and acknowledgement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and following that then brings you more knowledge. It's not going to bring you like knowledge of like trigonometry or something like that, or physics, but it's going to bring you the knowledge of the internal stuff, which is what the whole apparatus of tasawwuf is geared for. And then based on that hadith, if you act with what you know, Allah Ta'ala gives you knowledge of the things that you don't know. Many Sufis, many of the great writings of tasawwuf, when you look at the biography of those people, they weren't necessarily gifted jurists or hadith scholars. They were just very, very pious people. And Allah Ta'ala inspired them with this great penetrating insight on different type of things. There's also many of the ulama of tasawwuf, like Zarruq himself, who were accomplished ulama. That's usually tends to be the case. And when we read books of tasawwuf at sort of our level here, we tend to read those type of books. We read the books of the ulama so that we are sort of in the capable hands. But there are many, many writings and many, many excellent books of tasawwuf for all different tariqas and geographies, where you can really see this on display, where somebody's intense piety and practice and spiritual devotion has given them deep and penetrating insights into all sorts of things. Okay, let's continue with the text. Although the knowledge is only through learning, it has to do with a fundamental principle, not a practical application. Meaning, the people of tasawwuf that have this penetrating insight, they're not going to necessarily give you insight into the details of the Sharia. Actually, Imam Abu Hanifa used this hadith to prove this point, but if you look at Ash-Shawkani, he said, no, it's not that kind. It's about something very, very deep about, the power and energy that comes with certain letters in the Quran, and why Allah Ta'ala began certain surahs with those letters. Things that you're not going to find in any book or any fiqh book or anything like that. So it's not about practice, but it's about something more fundamental. Maybe probably we would say something metaphysical. Hence Abu Sulaiman rahimahullah said, when the self resolves to shun sins, it roams in the world of the dominion. Alam al-malakut. Al-malakut, it's the observable universe. Everything that we see around us that is Allah Ta'ala's, everything's Allah's dominion, but that's what we mean. Al-malakut is everything that we see that's owned by Allah Ta'ala. Then it returns to its master with the most exquisite gems of wisdom, without having received instruction from any teacher. So as I said, there are many, alhamdulillah, great examples of this, even though that's not our way. Our way is the way of knowledge. Our tariq that's a very important part of our tariq, which is why we have this whole format when we're actually like reading a book, line by line, etc. But when you stay away from the haram and you try to live that correct type of life, one of the benefits, other than the benefit of not being weighed down by the sin, and we ask Allah Ta'ala to bless us all with that type of life, one of the great benefits of that is that other things open up to you. So you see things as they really are. And that type of very deep penetrating insight, you're gifted with that. And it's a wonderful thing. Okay, principle 77. The source of every principle in the sciences of this world and the hereafter is to be taken from the Quran and the Sunnah, which contain praise for what is praiseworthy, censure for what is objectionable, and a description of what is commanded. Everything in our Islamic life is based on the Quran and Sunnah. It's just very simple. And all of the sciences, whether they be the quote-unquote Sharia sciences, tafsir, hadith, fiqh, usul al-fiqh, aqidah, or they be the rational sciences, the linguistic sciences, logic, whatever. Everything will trace its origin back to the Quran and Sunnah, directly through these axiomatic principles found in certain verses of the Quran or certain traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, as indications that we should go out and we should seek these type of sciences. So for us, it's, to use a Christian term, it's the alpha and the omega, right? The Quran and the Sunnah are the beginning and the end for us. And anything that we need, we will find in the Quran. One of the Sufis, he said, I think it was Abu Madian, and he said that the murid, the one who seeks the spiritual path, is not a true seeker until they find everything they need in the Quran. It doesn't mean that you are going to find details of a particular issue in the Quran, but you will find the principles. That's why he said you will find the source of every principle, he says. You'll find the principles of that in the Quran and in the Sunnah. Remember when we were Azhar students, and we'd like go behind the Azhar to get the books that we were studying, whatever the book was, whether it was in hadith or logic or whatever it is, the publisher, this particular publisher, he would always put an ayah, he would always put a verse on the first page of the Quran that spoke to that science. And I remember just, in my mind, that's kind of like cool, you open up your textbook and there's a verse that reminds you what's the relationship between that science and the primary sources. Even if it's something, quote unquote, like a boring science or a boring class or something like that, at least you have that little motivation that you know that that's where it's coming from. In understanding these things, people follow three approaches. The first belongs to those who are attached to the external letter without considering the meaning at all. These are the people of unbelief amongst the exoterists, and they are of no consequence. So we affirm the meaning of things, but we don't stop at those meanings, the exterior meanings. We want to know what's deeper than that. The second belongs to those who examine the meaning itself, reconciling the different inner truths. So they interpret what is to be interpreted and straighten out what is meant to be straightened out. These are the people of investigation amongst the rhetoricians, and the jurists. So people of language, of linguistic ability, people of the Sharia sciences, they're going to go a little bit deeper. They're going to look at what the hadith says regarding such and such action. And then they will try to apply that hadith, which is theoretic in the sense that it's a text. But then how do we practically apply this hadith to all of the things that might look like that scenario? So there's a little bit of, mental activity, a lot of mental activity that is required to be able to make those connections. And then the third approach, the third belongs to those who have fixed the meanings and ascertained their contents and have understood the symbolic significance from both the external world and its interior meaning. They are the realized Sufis and the meticulous religious authorities, not the sect of the Batinis, who construe everything symbolically, for they have fixed neither the inner meaning nor the outer expression and have deviated from the community and rejected the entire religion. We ask Allah Ta'ala for well-being through His grace. So the third approach is to start where the jurist starts, or the theologian starts, or where the linguist starts. Okay, I understand there's this concept, or there's a hadith, or there's a particular verse, and then I understand that this verse and this hadith can apply to all of these different scenarios. So I've done that mental exercise of application. But the person of tasawwuf is looking deeper. What is truly meant by that? What is the inner action? Allah Ta'ala says about sacrificing in the Quran, لَنْ يَنَالَ اللَّهُ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. When you sacrifice an animal, Allah's not getting fed. Allah's not getting the meat and the blood of the animal, but He's getting the taqwa that's from you in that act. Well, what does that mean? What is that? What is this violent act of sacrifice? How does that relate to inner relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What does that have to do with taqwa? That's what the person of tasawwuf is trying to do. What's the relationship between these two? And then you understand that there is something that is deeper, there's a deeper meaning to these acts of worship. Like what Imam al-Ghazali does in the Ihya, when he talks about all of the major acts of worship, the wudu, the prayer, the zakah, the hajj, the fasting, etc. And he said these are the inner dimensions of fasting, the inner dimensions of prayer, etc. But the person of tasawwuf doesn't take the inner meaning and by finding the inner meaning negate what's on the outside. That's what he says is the Batini approach, which is a approach that existed throughout Islam and still exists among some people, where they argue there's a true inner meaning. And once you can grasp that inner meaning, you can shed away what's outside. Well, that's not our way. That's not what the Prophet ﷺ taught us to do. He taught us to have that penetrating insight, to constantly ask and to strive at the inner answer. But the inner answer, once you arrive at it, you have to remember that the only reason you arrived at it is because there was that external clue to start out with. So once you understand the true inner meaning of prayer, it doesn't mean that you don't pray. It means that when you pray, your prayer is deepened, and your prayer is more fruitful, and your prayer is more with presence. It doesn't mean, oh, I know what prayer really means, so I don't need to do the salah. I don't need to pray Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. No, no, that's like the Batini way. And, they had a hard time throughout Islamic history because people like Zarruq and Ghazali like to beat on them a lot and then always criticize them and point them out. So we don't negate, the inner doesn't negate the outer. For us, the outer indicates the inner confirms the outer. To really benefit from the inner meaning, you have to have the outer form. So there's no expression of tasawwuf where we come to an understanding where, okay, I don't need to pray or fast anymore. I'm more enlightened. Now you've gone the wrong way, right? If you're more enlightened, then you will know that the greatest of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, did all of the external acts. And he was constantly in a position where he was witnessing the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the inner confirms the outer and vice versa. Okay, principle 78. The necessary, so here he's going to introduce these terms that come from the Sharia about things that are necessary, things that are needed, and things that are complementary or extra. When we talk about darura, when we talk about necessity in the Sharia, this is a technical term. We have a principle, ad-darurat tubih al-mahdhurat, that issues of necessity can make the impermissible permissible. So if I'm, God forbid, stuck somewhere on an island and there's nothing to eat or drink, and I find a vat of alcohol. Alcohol consumption is haram. But in that moment, not only is alcohol consumption permissible, it's obligatory. It's wajib. I have to drink the alcohol because there's a bigger order there, which is I have to try to survive. It doesn't only become permissible, it becomes obligatory. And if I did not drink the alcohol, thinking that it was haram, and it was in that dire situation, I would actually be committing a sin by not drinking the alcohol. So he's introducing these terms, but for a slightly different, I just wanted to explain them to you for a slightly different reason. Okay, the necessary, the daruri, it means in the Sharia that which life cannot exist without. Like the example that I just gave you, that the only thing you have to consume is alcohol or else you're going to perish. So it's like a life or death. You can think of it as life and death. The necessary, the daruri, is that whose non-existence would not allow us to be safe from perdition. So without which we would perish. The needful, haja, is that whose non-existent would lead to error without perdition. So a haja for us would be like if your refrigerator broke, which I've had the misfortune of happening to me several times in my life. It's really, really uncomfortable. Is the refrigerator breaking going to cause you to die? No, but it's a need. Like we don't know, in modern life, we don't know how to preserve our food. Maybe my grandparents did, but I know my parents don't, and therefore I don't. I have no idea how to preserve. All the stuff will go bad. And eventually it will create such a great hardship. So in the Sharia, sometimes there's a haja, there's a need, but it can be at the level of the darura. It's necessary. It's not necessary in and of itself, but the implications are so difficult without having it that it becomes at the level of the darura. But anyway, the haja, the need, is that which is right below life and death. And the complementary, the takmili, is that whose existence is preferable to its non-existent. And this takes place in everything acquired. So I have to have something to cover my body. It would be nice if I had 2 or 3 things to cover my body, but those are just extra, right? But if all I had was this, I guess I could take it off once every few days and wash it and then put it back on. So, and these are actual examples from the books of the Islamic law. That's why I'm giving them to you. Okay, so he's introduced these three terms. So what is he trying to say about them? Thus, it is necessary to take into consideration the various ranks of things according to their sequence, first things coming first. Necessary knowledge is that which we must not ignore if we were to be safe from perdition. This is what is specified as binding upon everyone. So there's a minimal amount of Islamic knowledge that we all have to have, without which our Islam is not complete at all. So you need to know how to wash and pray. And if Ramadan comes, then you need to know how to fast. If you have a little bit of wealth, you need to know about zakat, etc. So you have to, we call that al-fardul ayn, that which is individually obligatory for each person to know, which really wouldn't take more than a month to learn. It's not like super sophisticated stuff. Needful knowledge is that whose non-existence in someone is an imperfection. It is in the category of a collective duty on his part. Fardu kifaya. So a collective duty means somebody in the community needs to know it. Not everyone needs to know it. So knowing a great deal about Islamic history, for example. I mean, you don't need to know it to be a practicing Muslim, but it's pretty weird if you don't know the basic stuff about Islamic history. Complementary knowledge is that whose existence constitutes an increase in a person's excellence, such as logic, rhetoric, poetry, and the like, or any other science, anything that we study that is not necessary, that's just an extra. Obligatory acts of worship are necessary. Those prescribed by the Sunnah are needful, and those recommended are complementary. Each has subdivisions in itself, so understand. Okay, so he's just kind of giving you a bird's eye view, or a mental map rather, of the different types of sciences and how we should grade what is necessary versus what is necessary, etc. Okay, Principle 79. No one is permitted to undertake an act until he knows Allah Ta'ala's precepts therein. In agreement with the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu said, knowledge is the leader of action and action is its follower. So I want to do this project. So the first question I'm going to ask is, well, what is the Islamic ruling of engaging in this project? Okay, I kind of understand. Then I can engage in the project. That's what he's saying. Don't do it and then ask later, and then you find yourself like you're too deep inside, if it turns out to be something that's problematic. Accordingly, everyone must acquire knowledge of his state according to his capacity in an overall manner, so that he will thereby rid himself of his ignorance concerning the fundamental precept in the deed. 4. He is not under obligation to investigate all aspects of an act. Rather, each event and situation has its own conditions. So you don't have to rethink human history, he's saying. But when you're about to engage in something, you need to know about that issue. If you're going to buy a house, what are the do's and the don'ts? If I get a new job, or I want to apply to a job, or I'm considering leaving my job and taking another job, or something like that, you got to make a little bit of effort to ask yourself, what does the Sharia say about this? Maybe I need to pray istikhara. Maybe I need to talk to someone more knowledgeable to make sure I'm not making a mistake. Maybe I have a blind spot, I'm not seeing it, so somebody can help me see that. And then you go and you take it. So it's on a case-by-case basis. Whatever goes beyond that pertains to the domain of collective duty, the fardu kifaya, which is borne by whoever performs it. The earth is never empty of someone who stands on Allah's side with authoritative proof. Thus, there is no excuse for everyone else, so understand. Somebody's got to know a lot more than each of us individually. So there are some people whose jobs is to know those things and become experts in those things. That's what we mean by fardu kifaya. It's a communal obligation. Somebody's got to be a mufti, but not everyone can be a mufti. Somebody's got to be a historian, but not everyone can be a historian. Somebody's got to be a physician, not everyone can be a physician, etc. Now this last part, the earth is never empty without someone who stands in God's side. This is a major discussion amongst the Islamic theologians and the jurists. Because we know that the Prophet ﷺ said, every generation that comes is going to be worse than the generation before it. So from that point of view, we're kind of like on this downhill. So the question then, well, will there be a time where there will be no good, that there'll be no more Islam, etc.? So they say, well, there's another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, the good is always in the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ, just like the rain. You don't know what is the best of the rain, the beginning of the rain or the end of the rain. So based on that hadith, there will always be somebody, that's what Zarruq is reminding us of, there will always be somebody out there who's standing firm. They might be few, they might not be super popular, but we'll know them and we can find them and we can seek them out. And the ulama argue that will remain pretty much for the majority of human history until the very, very end, where the Prophet ﷺ told us the final hour will not come until there will be at least 2 or 3 generations. No one on earth will say Allah, Allah, Allah. So the final hour comes when there's at least 2 or 3 generations of people. So figure out how much a generation is, 50 or 60 years. So let's say at least 150 to 200 years will there be nobody worshiping God at all on earth. So ultimately, to go back to the first opinion, yeah, there will be a time where it will just be kind of extinct. But it will be extinct in the sense that there won't be good people looking for guidance and they won't find guidance. And that's not what the Prophet said. There'll be no good people at all. So it will be like an extinction of belief completely. So all of that from that one last sentence, just to kind of give you the background of what he's saying. Okay, we'll do one more. Principle 80. Seeking something at its source makes it more likely to obtain it. Therefore, it has been said, the layman asks so that he can act. Hence, it is his right to mention a particular event. The student asks in order to know. Therefore, he has the right to inquire about a problem by posing another problem. The religious scholar should provide an answer in such a clear manner that he cuts off any further questions. So the average person, he wants to know, can I do this? Like, can I take a loan out from the bank? Is bank interest riba? They just want to know, just give me a yes or no question. The Sharia student or the scholar in training, sometimes they will ask, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what kind of, they're going to ask a question of the question, not because they're trying to create fitna, because that's how the mind is formatted. I mean, this is more of like a public type of session, but when we have a more traditional like Sharia session, it's just all, sometimes you're endlessly asking questions. It's not because you're trying to stump each other to show off. It's like that's how the mind, that's how it's done. You have to ask the questions to make sure that you can zero in. But the buck's got to stop somewhere. So at the end of the day, the alim has to give an answer so that there are no more questions. So this is the answer to the question, so you can understand. I say that the student's questioning should be in a way similar to what is found in the hadith about Sayyidah Aisha, our mother, radiallahu anha, that she never heard anything about what she knew nothing without inquiring about it until she knew it. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever is held accountable for his misdeeds will be punished. So Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha said, does not God say he shall truly have an easy reckoning? سَوْفَ يُحَاسَبُ حِسَابًا يَسِيرًا, he'll have an easy reckoning. An answer stemming from knowledge is such as the Prophet ﷺ replied to Aisha's question. This means only the presentation of the accounts, but whoever will be argued with about his accounts will certainly perish. Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha was one of the great minds of the ummah, and she was a mufti. And because the Prophet ﷺ married her when she was very young, as we know, she outlived many of the Sahaba. So for decades and several 2 generations at least, she was providing religious knowledge for people. So she was not like some simple-minded person. She was very intelligent. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying this statement, whoever is held accountable for his misdeeds will be punished. So she's thinking about that. Yeah, but there's another verse in the Quran that says there will be an easy taking into account. So in her mind, she's like, well, how do you reconcile the two? And that's one of the jobs of Islamic scholarship, is how do you reconcile what we call al-furuq, things that might seem that are different, but they look the same. So the Prophet ﷺ responded, saying, reading in between the lines, yeah, you're right, there is that verse. But what I mean is that if you are actually, somebody's going to open up an audit with you, meaning Allah Ta'ala Yawm al-Qiyamah, that's not good, you're screwed. And we don't want to have that account. But the verse means only the presentation of the accounts. So the presentation of the account, the audit session will go quickly. There will be no opening of the books, to kind of continue with the theme. So she asked a question to understand the details of what she said. Well, isn't there a quote-unquote contradiction between what you just said and what Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran? And then the Prophet ﷺ put them together, saying this is true in this explanation and this is true with this explanation. And Nawawi, rahimahullah, determined that the reason the Prophet ﷺ denounced the man who said, and whoever disobeys the 2 of them, was because of the specific manner in which he was trying to make a point, not because of the use of the personal pronoun huma. for that has often occurred, and Allah Ta'ala knows best. What this is a reference to is a hadith. Let's get you the original text. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So a man spoke in front of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, "Man yuti' Allah wa rasulahu faqad rashad." Whoever obeys Allah and His Messenger ﷺ, for he has done right. وَمَنْ يَعْصِهِمَا, and whoever disobeys both of them, using the dual form, وَمَنْ يَعْصِهِمَا فَقَدْ غَوَى, and whoever disobeys both of them, he has erred. فَقَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ ﷺ, so the Prophet ﷺ said, بِئْسَ الْخَطِيبَ أَنْتَ, what a bad sermoner you are. قُلْ وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, rather say whoever disobeys Allah and His Prophet ﷺ. That's the story. So what does Imam al-Nawawi say about that? Let me read it again now that you know the text. Imam al-Nawawi determined that the reason the Prophet ﷺ denounced the man who said whoever disobeys both of them was because of the superficial manner in which he was trying to make a point, not because of the use of the personal pronoun huma. What this means is the criticism or the understanding of this hadith, and a long discussion of this takes place in many of the commentaries on the Shifa of Qadi Iyad, because in the very beginning he mentions it, is that you can't equate the Prophet ﷺ to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So وَمَنْ يَعْصِهِمَا, yani it's like if you say it and you're putting them at level, the Prophet ﷺ says, don't put me at the level of Allah, but rather says whoever disobeys Allah and His Prophet ﷺ. But Imam al-Nawawi is saying it's actually not technically haram to say that. It's just that the context, the way the man said it to the Prophet ﷺ. But if you're saying it quickly, because we say that all the time, وَمَنْ يَعْصِهِمَا, then we know we're saying it as a statement of fact. Kind of like we're just speaking in quick form. That's what he's talking about. Okay. So this principle was about questions and answering the questions. And you must ask questions. If you don't ask questions, you're never going to get to understand where you're going. But there's a right way to ask questions, and there's a wrong way to ask questions. And one of the ways that I in my personal life have implemented this is, many people are timid. They don't want to go ask the Shaykh a question. Allah did not give me that. I was very brazen. I used to ask a lot of questions in the beginning. But after several years of that, and Allah bless him for His infinite patience with me, I realized that I actually probably knew the answers to the questions that I was asking, but I didn't give myself a chance to think about it. So I pivoted. And what I would do is I would ask the question to myself, and then I would seek out to answer the question by looking things up and reviewing and stuff like that. And therefore, the amount of questions that I actually asked became obviously fewer. And I would only ask the question that really, really were concerning me, or I really couldn't figure out, or really just I can't wrap my head around it. I couldn't make heads or tail of it. And therefore, I gave myself it was really a gift of just researching. Okay, let me actually make an effort. If I really want to ask this question, let me see if I can really find out the answer. And when you start looking things up, you start finding all sorts of things that we weren't looking for in the first place. And therefore, while I still ask the Shaykh questions all the time, I like to believe that I ask him the questions that I really don't know the answers to. Like I'm really stuck on something, or something doesn't make sense. So that's also an important thing, is to learn how to ask the right questions. Most people don't. Most people think that if I can formulate the question in my mind and I can spit it out right away, then that's the right question to ask. And they oftentimes don't critique their own questions. That's very, very important. And our questioning is to arrive at the truth, so that we can therefore find it, submit to it, and act upon it. So it's not about some type of debate or trying to like clickbait or something like that. We actually want to know what's right, and I want to submit to the truth, and then therefore I can ask it. Some people ask questions and they really want to disprove something, or they want to disprove you, and those are all inferior ways of asking questions. Something for us to reflect on, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira.